Up until now, we've just been using a hard-coded list of our favorite teams to display which teams we're following on the My Teams home screen. We're now going to add some local persistence with Ionic storage. Internally, this storage utilizes the browser's local storage repository and stores key value pairs. One thing to note is that this type of local storage should only be used for temporary data. That is, data we're okay to lose because the operating system on the mobile device might decide to clean up that local storage, and we're not in control of that process. In the next demo, we're going to implement the persistence of My Teams with local storage. But later in the course, we're going to switch the backing store of the local storage over to SQLite, where we won't have to worry about our data being cleared by the operating system. There are two places where we need to interact with our favorites. One is the screen you see right here, where we want to get a list of our favorite teams to display on the screen. The other is the team detail page, where we can follow and unfollow teams. I'm going to create a user settings service that has the responsibility of interacting with our storage. So we'll add a new file to the shared directory called user-settings.service.ts. We'll add a service, and I'm going to call it user settings. And there's a couple of key imports we need at the top. We're going to import them from Ionic Angular, and they're going to be local storage and storage. Then I'm going to create a property called storage and set it equal to a new storage object, specifically passing in what type of storage we're going to use, which in this case is regular local storage. Now I'm going to create three methods. One that will favorite a team or follow, another that will unfavorite a team or unfollow, and a third that determines a Boolean true false, are we following a given team? So let's start with favorite team. We're going to pass in a team, a tournament ID, and a tournament name. Before we store it in the local storage system, I'm just going to create a new object here to combine all of these parameters into one object. So we'll say team equals team, tournament ID is tournament ID, and tournament name is tournament name. The API to work with storage is quite straightforward. All I have to do is say this.storage.set, and it's a key value pair. So the key is going to be the team ID, and the value is just going to be an object. It has to be a string, so I'm going to call json.stringify on this item. Now the method to unfavorite a team is pretty straightforward. We're just going to pass in that team object, and we'll say this.storage.remove, and we'll do it by the key, which is the team ID. Finally, we're going to have a method that returns true or false is favorite team. Passing in that team ID, and we'll just return a ternary here, this.storage.get, and this is based on a promise, so we say then, if there's a value, we'll return true. If not, we'll return false. Now, since we've added that file, let's go to our share.ts, and let's make sure we're including an export for it. Now, we want this to be globally available in our app. So we'll come in here to the app.ts. Let's add it to the import. We're also going to add it to the providers here. Now that we've got that in place, let's go to our team detail page. And we're going to add user settings to the import. And of course, we want to make sure we're injecting it as well. We need to use the user settings in three places on this screen. First, when the screen loads, we need to check if the team is already a favorite so we can set the initial value of the button correctly. Second, we need to call the favorite team method when the user favorites a team. Last, of course, we need to call the unfavorite team method when the user removes a team as a favorite. And let's actually name this user settings with an S at the end. So let's do these three things now. The first thing I'm going to do is come down to the bottom of the IonViewLoaded method right after the team assignment. And we'll say this.usersettings.isFavoriteTeam. We want to check if the current team here, we'll send in that team ID is the favorite team. And remember, this works on a promise, which sends back a Boolean value. And we'll just say this.isFollowing equals that value. So that'll happen when the screen first loads. Now we want to go down to the toggle follow method, and we have a couple of to-do placeholders here. So one is we have a to-do to persist the data. This is when we're unfollowing because we're setting isFollowing to false. So for this one, we want to say this.userSettings.unfavorite team, and we'll just pass in this.team. And then finally, down here at the end, this is when we are following a team. So we want to say this.userSettings.favorite team. And we'll send in this.team, this.tournament ID, and this.tournament name. Let's just make this a little bit easier to read. Okay, let's have a look at what we have in our app so far. Now here we are on the My Team screen. Now these two teams right here are still hard-coded, and that's why they're showing up at this point. So far we've only worked on the team detail screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this first HC Elite on the March Madness tournament to go to the team detail screen for that team. We can see here's the Add Favorite button. So it's not detecting that it's a favorite per our local storage right now. What I'm going to do is come over here to the application tab and specifically look at local storage, and you can see it's completely empty right now. Now I'm going to click Add Favorite, and when it does this, we can now see that we've actually got the data stored in our local storage here. I can then click it again. Am I sure I want to unfollow? If I say yes, then local storage gets cleared out. Even more important than that, let's add them as a favorite again. We can see it's stored here. I'm going to go back to the home screen. Now this time when I come into the screen, we can see right off the bat, this button is now set identifying them as a favorite team, because when the page first loads, it detects that yes, we have the data in storage, so let's show them as a followed team. So for this screen, we're looking pretty good right now. Now we just need to implement the favorites for this screen so it can show the list of all our favorites. Now we're going to come back here to our user settings service, and we need another method for getting all the favorites. We're going to use Lodash here, and I'm going to add a method at the bottom called getAllFavorites. And if we look at this method here, it's just iterating over the properties in window.localStorage, doing a JSON parse so we get the objects for each one, and returning the array. You might notice I'm not using this.storage here because the default storage API against local storage doesn't have a method to get all the items, though we will see something a little better when we get to the SQLite example later. So let's go to the My Teams page. We've got to inject user settings, both to the import and inject into the constructor. Now the favorites, we can comment all this out, and we're just going to make the favorites an empty array. Then we're going to come down here, and we're going to add an ion view did enter method. And this is going to have one line of code, this.favorites equals this.userSettings getAllFavorites. And that's it. Now we're ready to run the app. And this time when we come into the app, we can see we've only got one team here. And that's because it's actually grabbing this team from our local storage. So it just shows the one that we stored in local storage. Let's prove this to ourselves that this actually works. We'll go add a team from a different tournament. So we'll click Find a Tournament. We'll call Holiday Hoops Challenge. We'll add HC Elite 7th grade, and let's say add a favorite. Now if we go back to the home screen, we can see that when we come into the home screen, both teams are there, and they're both stored in local storage. Local storage can be effective for certain scenarios. However, remember that if you have data that you absolutely cannot afford to lose, then it's not an appropriate place to store the data, since the operating system might decide to clear it out. A little later in this course, we'll convert this example to using SQLite, which will provide very reliable local storage.